gentlemen, everyone around and in between. It is Debate Sensei NPDA edition. This is where we talk about things relevant to competitive debate for the National Parliamentary Debate Association, NPTE. I have with me resident expert Paul Villa from Diablo Valley College, as you can see, sporting the merch there. Thank you, Paul, so much for being here.
Nah, no problem.
All right. I'm Jerry Kabuka Miller. I often forget to introduce myself. I'm a professor of communications. I'm at Santiago Canyon College, also founder of Proto Communications for instructional design. All right. We are going to be talking about some final round analysis. And honestly, like topic analysis is kind of the inspiration for the show. I always just liked talking about topics, even if I wasn't debating in them, you know what I mean? Just getting a better understanding and just a structured approach to kind of understanding a single issue in a focused conversation. So these are some of my favorite conversations. All right. And the final round topic for the Gaskey. Tell me a little bit about the Gaskey first off. Like, what's the significance of that tournament?
So the Gaskey is San Diego State's tournament that they host. I believe they renamed it a year or two ago. And so as far as significance of it, it tends to be the last, whether you want to call it national circuit or pseudo-national circuit tournament of the season prior to NPDA and NPTE most years. And so I don't know actually that back in the day it used to be like national circuit, but now that it's kind of the last tournament left, and obviously the NPDA is run by Ashley and Knuckles and those folks, and so it gets a big draw now. And then obviously this year it had sort of a lot of I think 4 of the teams that I think are the 4 best teams in the country at it, and so it's become a pretty significant sort of like last hurrah. Let's see where everyone is at this point, and it's especially important because there are a number of teams that find it hard to travel over winter break due to like school regulations and things. And since Mile High is held over winter break, there's always 1 or 2 of the top teams that can't make it to that tournament that is otherwise usually one of the highest level competitions in the country. And so this is sort of our last look at what is the form that teams are currently in this semester. Has anything changed in sort of like leading into nationals? Who can we expect to be in those elims?
Okay. All right. And so who did we see in the elims at the Gaskey?
So to absolutely no one's surprise, we saw a lot of Berkeley and a lot of Whitman.
Okay.
And so, and that's kind of a trend that has repeated at tournaments this year. Like any tournament that both of those teams have been at has probably featured both of those teams in the deep sort of elimination rounds of the tournament itself. And so, it's very exciting because Whitman and Berkeley had not debated since October. And so we basically debated at the first 2 tournaments of the year, and they did not debate again until the last tournament of the year. So, a lot of interesting things happening there. Let's just actually break this down because I just have it pulled up in front of me really quickly. So I'm looking at the Elim 1 postings from the Gaskey Memorial, right? And I'm just going to list the teams that were in those elims, right?
Okay.
Cyerson Keene, team that is reigning national champions, team that I think is the best team in the country. We've got Rice, Renteria, and Surya, a team that I said is one of the top 6 teams in the country. We've got State Chicken Knockthrough from Rice, top 6 team in the country. We've got Grachiskin, which I always say wrong, so I apologize, and Matthew, top 3 team in the country. We've got Moulton and Lou from Whitman, top 3 team in the country. We've got Lynn Schuster, which is not the quote-unquote B team from Berkeley, but it's like their C team, like their 3rd team, but a Berkeley team nonetheless. And then we've got another Rice team in Fan and Gupta. And then, wild card here, we have Poley and Planchon from Point Loma Nazarene. And so, ignoring that last team, not that they didn't earn their spot or whatever, we have essentially every one of the best teams in the country minus UT Tyler.
Okay.
And so it, for a tournament that like is, pseudo national circuit, I mean, that's as national circuit as it gets.
Yeah, absolutely.
6 or so of the best teams.
All right. So who was in the final round was Berkeley and Whitman.
So the final round was Brenna and Tristan against Alexa and Kyle from Whitman. So that's Grachishkin and Matthew.
And who's what sides?
And for the record, the semifinal before that had been the other Whitman team, against Brenna.
Okay.
So in this round, the affirmative was Brenna and Tristan, and the negative was Alexa and Kyle.
All right. And they get the topic: the United Mexican States should significantly increase its targeted enforcement operations against drug cartels. When you first sent that to me, I just saw the United. I'm like, all right, it says United, United States federal government. And I'm like, oh, wait, it says United Mexican States right there. And so that is a little bit of a twist on
Sure.
on an approach. So I'm assuming that you knew what what happens in this round.
So even a little bit more than that, I actually was in prep for Berkeley on this round.
Okay.
I happened to be at a tournament and had downtime, and Brent and Tristan were like, "Hey, can we get you in a call?" And so I know what happened in the round, but I also know the thought process that was kind of happening in the Berkeley prep room with what was going on at the time.
So let's start at the top, man. You see the United Mexican States. Like, what? How do you approach that? It's because normally when you're speaking, you're like, okay, most of all of the tournaments I've been to are in the United States, and therefore acting as the United States seems very natural, right? And now when you are told to act in some for another country, I don't know, it kind of makes me a little uncomfortable at first, you know what I mean? And so I'm like,
it's certainly not something that you're used to necessarily. Obviously, I think it's good that we do that, you know what I mean? And But it's different. It's different for sure. And I can tell you that this was basically the sort of this United Mexican States was the first thing that I brought up in prep, right? Because I was talking about when it came to the plan, I was mostly helping with MG prep. And I was like, are we concerned that there is a T coming from the other side that we have to defend action either done by or occurring within multiple of the Mexican states? Because I think I could be wrong off the top of my head. I think it's like 30 or so Mexican states. And so the first question was sort of like, what advocacy do we have that allows us to defend action by the Mexican states? Because, in the United States, like the United States federal government versus like the United States could be argued that one is calling for the states to do something and one is calling for the federal government to do something. And so that was kind of the first question that came up. The second question, though, pretty quickly was politics, right? Because we're trying to think of the other team probably does not have already pre-written somewhere a Mexican election ticks dissect. But when you're debating the other best team in the country, you have to prepare for that. And so we started having discussions around, okay, what's going on? And for those of you who don't know, it is an election year in Mexico. And in Mexico, it's the process is not especially convoluted, but like basically everyone's up for election at the same time.
Okay.
And there's like a process to it, but it's like there's like 500 people who are trying to be elected at the same time as the president. And you can't possibly prepare for like, oh, the 4th district of Jalisco's Southern Territory is going to vote in this way. And so those questions kind of came to mind. But the head person in prep for Berkeley was Alex Lee, or Gabe's old debate partner, who's, I think, an absolute legend in prep, and especially case debate, just incredible, one of the best. And Alex right away was like, we're going to have the military do something. Right away, he's like, we're going to have the military take policing action in this context, because it seemed like the easiest actor to defend that would constitute use by the United Mexican States, but would let us skirt around the discussion of whether this specific state or this politician or whatever has sort of like exposure from it or whatever. And ultimately, the plan that they ran, and I can't remember the exact location off the top of my head. I'd have to find it on a map again. But basically, the plan that they ran was having the Mexican military monitor drug trafficking in a specific port on the eastern side of Mexico, on like the Atlantic side. And do sort of like interdiction efforts and like checking of boats and things of that nature. And then the AF ended up being primarily about stopping the flow of drugs into Europe and the Southern American states, And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was also a advantage about like sex trafficking and kind of the overlap between
Oh yeah,
human trafficking and drug trafficking as it pertains to the law enforcement stuff.
I would think that. Yeah, I'd probably put the human trafficking stuff as the first. If I was saying anything about that. And so is using the military like a way you were thinking that there might be like a politics disadvantage if the federales were the agents doing
So
it?
there were a few things that play there. One is that we needed an actor that we thought constituted like complete like action by the actor that is the Mexican states, right? And so
Mhm.
the issue is, well, if we just send in the like local police near this port, then like that's
Yeah,
probably not the Mexican states, right? So then you start talking about like the federales and whatnot. And what came up there, and this comes up in the debate, is there's a lot of corruption. Like there's
yeah,
significant
yeah,
corruption
yeah.
within law enforcement efforts down there, and so that's going to be a problem for you. And so Alex was like, I think the easiest thing for us to defend is the military. The military has more strict protocols around this, and more importantly, the Mexican military has a lot of relationships with like the United States military and things of
Right,
that nature. And so basically, there's just more checkbacks and accountability through coordination with other agencies. I think is what it sort of came down to for Alex.
right. So yeah, like specifically, there was an NFA. Was it an NFA topic about Southcom? Because and
Yes, yes,
yeah, and so I immediately jumped to. I'm like, oh crap! Like if you're doing all this drug interdiction, which is a lot of what Southcom
yes.
does, you can foster a relationship that way.
Yeah.
Like it might even be welcomed. So okay, all right. So drug interdiction used in the military in the Gulf of Mexico. Fascinating. What does the negative come at you with?
So the negative strat, and actually I hit up Brenna to ask her about this because I didn't actually get to see the round.
A little synopsis is
Yeah,
fine.
it had a number of elements to it, but sort of the things that ended up coming into play were a lot of the things that got predicted in preparation, right? So there was this position about how, well, these individuals are corrupt, right? And so like there's no way that you're able to actually solve for
Right.
doing this thing.
Hmm.
There was a position that I'm not entirely sure I understand still, but basically amounted to doing this drug like sort of enforcing these laws against drug cartels necessitates you going into the desert, some specific desert,
Okay. Okay.
and that is bad because this desert is like vulnerable in some environmental way, and so
In
sending
an
in like some kind of
environment.
operation would be bad.
Oh wow.
But obviously the AF was like, we're not in the desert, we're specifying to this thing. And I think there's some like theory debate happening on that level about whether they get to defend that
Mm,
or not. But my understanding is that the negative, to a certain degree, ended up going heavily for like a presumption ballot and going for like, no, you don't solve because of like the corruption and things of that nature. And the AF was like, but we do for these
yeah.
other
Yeah.
things.
Listen,
Um,
I'm a big fan of making sure people spend a decent amount of time invested in defensive arguments. Like there's some coaches, I don't know what side you're on, but I
I'm
think that
hugely in favor of defense.
yeah, because I think we're kind of overdoing the offense, and it's like you just see how gamey it is. You know what I mean? It's like you want to establish a bit of credibility, and I think defense, like first off, takes out some impact level analysis from them, but also just like boosts your credibility because you're just saying things that are reasonable. You know,
The thing, so the first video essay I ever made on debate before we even had Proteus Academy
Mhm.
was basically a critique of the offense defense paradigm in debate and the focus that people have on offense. Because the thing with defense is, well, there's two things really. One, it is incredibly easy to do. It has zero risk to it because you can't
Yeah,
turn defense, right?
right.
Like there's zero risk to it. It's very time efficient. It's easy to prepare ahead of time rather than
Yeah,
think of. So the
yeah,
level of execution is very low. But crucially, it's also usually true.
right. Yeah,
And to me, the fact that defense is true tends to make it like a little bit easier to win. Now the problem is, and this is definitely a parlay thing, Parley has this cult of offense, right? Like they do not want to vote on defense like pretty much ever. You have to have some offense. And that of course makes sense to a certain extent. But it's to the point where like people are just like, oh, you just only read defense or whatever. And it's like, so they only told you that you're wrong. And like, function like lying and making stuff up. And I think 100% that you need to try and, similar to what you said, right? Like if you're reading defense, right? If you're interrogating someone's solvency, their solvency mechanisms, the internal links between their impacts, so on and so forth, like that should be a big deal. Like you should be able to just explain that slowly or whatever in a way that convinces the judge that, wait a minute, you're right, that doesn't make sense. As opposed to just saying the word turn and then like reading 10 turns with no uniqueness or whatever, that you're just.
Oh, and I've done that. Like, it's probably one of the reasons I feel this way. I'm like, because I went through that stage where I'm like, I'm doing like 5-6 turns off of a single impact, and they're kind of like, dude, like, hang off that stuff, like just scale back on that.
There's this interesting sort of flow of things, I think, because there's what I call like minefield debate, and then like explanatory debate. And Parley, over the 11 or 12 years that I've been involved in it, has sort of gone from one spectrum and then back. Like it always seems to be going.
Oh, okay.
Because the truth is, if the best team is a technical, hyper-fast minefield debate, meaning they're just setting a million traps as fast as they can, and if you step on one of the mines, you lose.
Yeah.
The best way to beat that team is not to be even faster and more technical than them.
Yeah.
It is to be very explanative. But if the best team is a very explanative, very ethos team, the best way to beat them is to go very fast. And it's just about not playing to the team's wheelhouse. And right now, we're in this interesting place where I would argue that all of the sort of top 3, top 4 teams are not defined by one end of that spectrum or the other. Like they are all very capable of going incredibly fast, winning on theory, winning on K drops, all this stuff. But also, I've heard all of them just slow down, talk at a conversational rate, and win. And I think that's what's making it like, how do you get to an 80 or 90% win rate against the best competition? That's how that you can just do it all. You don't have any big vulnerability people can get to.
Okay, almost like a little bit of code switching to some degree. Okay, so that environmental disadvantage was rattling around in my head. Oh man, if they didn't predict the in the Gulf of Mexico, you might be able to do some Gulf of Mexico stuff, but you could still make the desert DA work by saying that, because I don't know, you'd have to traffic more over land than
exactly. I think the turn from the negative side is that like when you constrain their operations on coastal waters or whatever, that forces them into the interior of the country. That increases their presence in the desert, their disruption of the deserts, building tunnels, so on and so forth. And I think that's potentially an angle. Now, I don't know if that comes up in the debate, but I think that is an option for sure. I think this resolution is potentially bad. I guess is what I would say.
Like it is ripe for a K then.
I think that the issue, I think that like from a game balance perspective, this would be a fantastic NPTE topic.
Okay.
But is a really bad, not really bad, but a bad NPDA topic. And what I mean by that is, if both teams have 2 months to prepare for this topic, this is a fantastic topic. Because we probably are going to get some of these really interesting Mexican elections debates, these environmental positions that are more well-developed, understanding the nuances of the various actors that are relevant. But I think in 20 minutes, it is so hard for a negative to be prepared to debate the AF here unless you get to read the K. I think outside of the K, you're in a lot of trouble. And this wasn't a panel where you could not read the K. The panel, for the record, was Joseph Evans, Brittany Hubble, and Mark Ouimet, all of whom are experienced people. But I wouldn't say that Brittany or Jevons are especially K-oriented. And Mark Ouimet was a K debater, but it's kind of coming back after a time away. And so I don't know that it was really an option that was super available to them. I believe they did read a K in this round. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but I just don't know how a negative is supposed to prepare for a topic that essentially says Mexico should do something law enforcement related about cartels. Because it's like, so Mexico should do something about the bad people.
Yeah.
That's the topic, It's, like, it didn't say like against like the fishing industry. It says against the people who we all know like enslave people and traffic people and murder villages and bury buses filled with children and stuff. Like, oh, okay, cool. Let's just do something about. It's like the topic says the United States should do something about homelessness. It's like, oh, great. Well, if you're the AF, that's fun, and if you're the
Yeah.
NAG, it's a K debate if you can.
Yeah. I see what you're saying because if you did that in something that's more familiar to us, we would totally have that immediate response, right? The I Speaking about defensive arguments though, like I think ever since I stopped debating, I've gained an appreciation for inherency arguments, and they are
Yeah.
nobody loves them, nobody likes them. You know what I mean? But I like them.
The eye bomb might be my favorite thing in LD. I think
Oh
your
yeah.
app is already happening is just true in like half these LD rounds I see.
So I look at this, I'm like, okay, so aren't the Mexican states already doing something?
And that is true and becomes a massive problem for Whitman in the debate.
Oh, okay.
Because Whitman is trying to hang their hat on this like corruption will circumvent the solvency of the AF stuff, or
Oh,
and basically the way this gets framed is like they just won't actually do it. It was almost like a you don't get. I think this actually came up where Whitman kind of went for you don't get durable fiat because corruption exists, right? So
mhm.
you don't get to defend that the plan definitely happens for sure because of this. And Tristan in the MG is able to come up and say these politicians are already like corrupt in theory and in the pocket, and yet they already in the status quo have a number of anti-drug operations happening, and so we sure do get to defend fiat and so on and so forth. And like
Okay.
you're saying, that is a problem because I mean, the resolution is written in such a way that the AF like gets spotted inherency because like what are they? The thing is, it's very hard, especially in national parley, for you to win on stock issues because people don't believe in stock issues.
Yeah, I know.
They don't believe in topicality, solvency, all those kinds of things. And so in this case, that should have been core negative ground that like they already are doing these operations. Prove that yours is significantly different. Prove that the status quo does not result in the implementation of the plan. But that's not going to happen in these rounds, and it's a big problem for people.
Yeah. Because, like you said, like that would probably be one of the more important arguments in a panel discussion. Let's
Yeah.
say, you know what I mean? It's like if you want to have a comprehensive understanding of this issue, you would need to devote and invest a significant amount of time to that issue, and we just kind of like,
Yeah.
not offense, so just ignore it. Oh man. So if you were on the negative and you're like, I gotta do a K on this one, which one is jumping to mind?
So if we're talking about the topic specifically and not the debaters in the round
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
context, then I think this probably ends up being some kind of okay, I have a few thoughts. Number one, I think Cap and Neolib are just always in the back pocket. I think that you can
Yes.
always, kind of lead those. And I think that if you have familiarity with those positions, then there's very solid arguments to be made about sort of the commodification of individuals and drugs and like the driving factor of drug cartels is the profit motive and so on and so forth. I think that there's probably more of some sort of like a Gombin state of exception type stuff, or perhaps something even like security adjacent, because specifically not because of the topic, but because the AF reads a military plan, like having the military do this action, tie into it. But I think the topic itself to me matters much less than your wheelhouse, right? And so this is a problem that I found with a lot of teams, even the high level teams, where like realistically, if you have like the perfect K for a round and a team has never read it before, they don't want to read it. Even if you're like, and the thing is that would never happen with a dissat. Like if you told a team, I have the most unbelievable Mexican politics elections dissad of all time. The links are, the explanation is going to be insane. You just read this word for word and it's a dub and there's no way they have any answers to it. And they'd be like, okay, whatever. Because every single round that you do a straight up debate, you almost always read a disadvantage you've never read. So it's like, whatever. But when it comes to the K, teams feel very different about it. And I think that causes some issues for them when it comes to it. so I know that Whitman, in the few times I've seen them debate, does like some like I don't know the exact word, but like some like magical realism type stuff, and like something about like
That sounds familiar. Okay, yeah. Oh, I'd have to go and review that. But
yeah, and then there's some stuff like that, and like I've seen them talk about like viewing the world through sort of like a surrealist, like artistic perspective, and like the debate has a sort of
right.
extension of that, and so I don't know exactly what they read in this round, but I think that a cave probably was necessary, unless, and this, as far as I'm aware, did not come up in the round. I think there's a lot of counterplan ground. Anytime you get a resolution like this, I think where you don't know what the AFA is going to do, I think it is important to instead to let's prepare counterplans for like 2 or 3 different actors, and whichever one they do pick, we will audible to the other one. And let's just make sure we have like a turn scenario or dissat or solvency deficit scenario based on that, right? Like maybe you do go, no, the federal police should do this. And you have like sort of jurisdiction stuff about how like Mexican army overstretch is bad, or like sort of like, South America and the history of militaries taking over governments because they were going beyond what should have been their powers, like whatever, right? Depending on the actor that they pivot to. I think those are all solid options. And I know that a very overlooked thing, in my opinion, in parley debate is unconditional alt actor counterplans.
Okay.
Like alternative actor counterplans. Because here's how most parley debate actually shakes down. Someone reads a counterplan. It's almost always conditional. It's almost always a pick if they can. And then they don't go for it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now they have to answer condo. And the other team knows, like, if you have a good counterplan, they're hoping you're condo. Because the way they beat you is not to actually beat your good counterplan. It's to read condo, like conditionality bad, and then go for it. And just be more practiced than you on it. And if you're one of these top theory teams, like you're going to win on condo. But if a team comes up against you and reads an unconditional, actually good idea counterplan that is not permeable or that has a real net benefit, now their only option is to answer. And they don't have this. The big thing here is this, right? All these top teams have, to a certain degree, have their blocks. They know the 7 things they're going to say against the K. They know the 6 things they're going to read against politics. They know the 5 things they're going to read against business confidence, and so on and so forth. No one has blocks for all factor counterplans. No one's ready for them because they're always reliant on condo, whatever. So you force that debater to actually make arguments on something they almost certainly did not prepare at all in prep, and that you did. And I just don't see enough of it. Now, the double-edged sword there is if they answer the counterplan, you lose the debate. It's something that you have to do usually with a topicality strategy so that you can functionally be condo by just being like, we're going for T, even though we're not that far ahead on it because we're just swamped on the counterplan. But I think that has to be something that teams take more advantage of.
Yeah. Okay. As you read it, though, you can also look at, I was just thinking about, if you read the resolution and you think to yourself, who is saying this? That opens up some neo-colonial critique.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I actually don't know if set call is really in. So UT Tyler is a set call team. They read a lot of set call stuff like settler colonialism. Berkeley did like 5 years ago, but these days they're mostly a cap team and like a magic team. I don't know how to explain that. They do. And Whitman kind of has their own approach to it. But yeah, I think set call could definitely be an approach here.
Especially the tournament's happening in San Diego.
Yeah.
Right? You start taking the sort of geographical location into it. It starts, I don't know, you start getting something pretty rich.
Yeah, I also think that if you were asking me, so one of my first questions as the negative is always, what terms can we win on T? And I think that the words in the resolution that immediately jumped out to me are sort of this targeted enforcement operations.
Targeted
section,
enforcement,
right?
yeah.
Because you can take that as a term of art and be like, it has to be this specific thing, a targeted enforcement operations. I think you can do T on enforcement. You're not enforcement, you are action. There's a distinction between law enforcement and one of the T's that I've seen in law enforcement stuff historically has been there is a difference between the enforcing of the law and the prosecution or investigation of the law. Like basically drawing this distinction where law enforcement efforts is arresting people, but it's not prosecuting people, or the opposite. Law enforcement is prosecuting people for breaking laws. It is not investigating people for laws, arresting people, so on
Oh,
and so
right.
forth. And the good thing about a T like that is you can read it no matter what, because they are
Right.
either going to do one or the other. And you can say that it's extra topical when they do the other thing. I think the word operations, though, is the T that I would have read.
Oh,
And I didn't have to think about the B and the nig because I wasn't, I was the
yeah.
affirmative
Yeah.
function in this debate. But operations is 100% right for T in this debate, because I think that you should be able to define operations in a way that requires a very broad action within an existing parameter of like missions, right? Like an operation is not like a one-off drug sting or something, right?
Right.
Like, it's like Plan Columbia. You obviously you did the
Yeah.
LG topic. Like that is a operation, right? It's like a
Yes.
whole series of thousands and thousands of actions and so on and so forth. And I think that there's probably something there. But Bob, I think there's a lot of T's on this topic, even because it's
Okay.
against in drug cartels, right? Like, is this a drug cartel or is this a gang? Is
Okay.
this like is a drug cartel an institute that is just drugs? Why do you get to defend human trafficking offense if that's not
Yeah.
and so on and so forth? And so I think counterplans and T's were where or the K were where you needed to head on this topic, because you probably are not going to be able to have a predictable disad based on the way that it's worded.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thank you. This is the a different sort of actor in the resolution itself kind of threw me for a loop, and I think it becomes really interesting. All right. So thanks for a little bit of background about the what happened in this round, and we'll be back next week talking about more stuff dealing with NPDA. Thank you, Paul Villa, for joining me. All right. Oh, where am I? There you go.